Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, rescue plan, bailout, or both. Wall Street, Detroit, who's next? We chat with McClatchy White House correspondent David Lightman. With jobless rates shooting up, will the Obama stimulus program try to save dying highway construction plans? Not a good idea, argues Stewart Schwartz of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. The Maryland Commission on Capital Punishment is out with its recommendations. We'll hear from its chairman, former U.S. Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti. Also, a preview of Anna Huong's 2000 painting Peace Mural. We visit historic Glen Echo Park and its dance hall. There's poetry by Naomi Ayala, plus the jazzy sounds of singer-songwriter Leah.
But you done make me one thing that ain't just as it should be.
On the Coffee House. Welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. The catchphrase of the day is too big to fail. Our ever-globalizing economy has turned bigness into a virtue and made failure for the biggest of the big unthinkable, lest the entire economic system come tumbling down. The big three automakers, or once big and likely soon to be two, are asking taxpayers in Congress for a bridge loan to the tune of $34 billion. At this taping, a deal between Congress and the White House appears imminent, an immediate $15 billion with strings attached. But is a deal a bridge to nowhere? $15 billion, $34 billion used to sound like a lot of money until Wall Street walked off with $700 billion. Where is this all going? With us to bring some perspective to the matter is David Lightman, White House correspondent for McClatchy News Service, whose slogan is Truth to Power. David, welcome to the Coffee House, and what is the truth about the auto rescue plan?
Well, thank you for having me, and the truth, of course, is elusive. We don't know how it's going to work. We don't know if it will work. We don't know how much eventually these car companies will get. At testimony before the Senate Banking Committee in early December, an economist said 15 billion, 34 billion. No, he said they need 75 to 125 billion. Another leading economist, 200 billion. We just don't know.
But this isn't something that's just affecting the American automobile industry. The Japanese automobile industry, as successful as it's been, is in the decline also right now. To what extent are the current woes a factor of the worldwide recession?
Well, economists will tell you quite a bit. Unless you get people buying cars again, none of this matters. What's going to get them to buy cars? Well, number one, availability of credit. Credit, by all accounts, pretty much dried up during October. Credit affects a lot of car dealers on two levels. One is simply consumers not being able to get loans. Also, dealers need credit to fill those showrooms, to keep their inventory going. All that began to dry up. So that's one factor there that'll get things going. Second, the economy, consumer confidence. As you know, this just breeds on itself. The stock market goes down, people read the numbers, they say, gee, why should I make a big purchase? For most people, a car is the second biggest purchase they're going to make. They're going to buy a car in the midst of this, and I'll throw in a third factor. At the time of the taping here, there was talk that if General Motors and Chrysler don't get federal aid, they could face bankruptcy. People want to buy a car from a company that might go bankrupt? People doubt it.
It is General Motors and Chrysler that are in the deepest doo-doo right now. Ford seems to be tagging along, asking for $9 billion as well, but they're not. They say that they're not in immediate danger of going belly up. What would happen to the economy if General Motors did go under?
Boy, a lot of people would lose jobs. I think the markets would have a tremendous negative reaction. General Motors, as you know, has been an icon of American industry. It's, if you're probably not as old as I, but back in the 50s, what was good for General Motors was good for the USA. I think that was Charlie Wilson's phrase. A lot of people still believe that. It'd be a terrible psychological and economic blow.
President-elect Obama says that, yes, we need to do something to help Detroit, but it needs to be conditioned. It needs to be conditioned on Detroit coming around to building fuel-efficient, hybrid-type cars, to accepting a deal to pay back the money, to cut executive compensation, and to have a real business plan that people can believe in. To what extent do you think Detroit can be held to that?
Well, it's in the legislation that, again, as of today, as we're taping, Congress is considering all these things, even to the point in that legislation where they put a near ban on corporate jets for these automakers if they're getting these loans. So I think Congress can write all that in, but here's where you run into trouble. How much can the federal government micromanage a car company? Now, there is precedent for this. Chrysler, 1979, 80, and so forth, when they got loan guarantees from the federal government, and the government set up a board then headed by the Federal Reserve Board chairman. And it worked, but times were much different. The size of the loan wasn't as big, the economy wasn't in quite such straits. There are many, many differences. So there's a real concern that, again, the government may be getting in too deep here.
Eliot Spitzer, the former governor of New York, recently wrote a commentary in Slate in which he said we really have two choices. One choice is to accept these huge economies of scale with companies that are too big to fail, and when they do fail, and they inevitably will fail, then the government has to step in, take them over, and manage them, as you're describing, which he says is not a great idea because the government doesn't really know how to manage these companies. On the other hand, what we could do is we could put in place a system of incentives or disincentives that result in company sizes that are more manageable, such that when a company does fail, the whole economy doesn't come tumbling down underneath it. To what extent in a global economy is, and he was obviously advocating for this second alternative, to what extent in a global economy is that really a likelihood or a possibility?
We don't know. And that's why it's a fascinating debate that's been going on in Washington these last couple of months about just that, and I'll throw another one into the mix. Should these companies be allowed to go bankrupt? What would happen? I mean, a lot of authoritative voices will tell you, let them go bankrupt. Let them be forced to restructure. Let's see what happens. Now, that is not the prevailing sentiment, but it's out there, and we just don't know. I don't want to say it's similar to, but it's reminiscent to some degree of what happened to the railroads in the 40s, 50s, 60s. You couldn't let the railroads fail, but as people started using airplanes, or interstate highways became, the interstate highway system was built beginning in 1956, people left trains. And as you know, the government decided, well, we can't let the train system fail. Amtrak was created, and they've been debating that one for 37 years. Should government money go to Amtrak? Should people in the middle of the country who rarely use Amtrak be, in effect, subsidizing people in the Northeast who do? So these debates are ongoing.
And we're going to pick up this very question in our next segment, and I think there'll be some contrary opinion about that. I was wondering your opinion on this, though. Republicans say that the reason that Detroit is in such, putting aside the recession, that Detroit's in such deep economic problem is that the unions are too strong and the wage and benefit package is too large. Many Democrats counter and say that the reason Detroit's having big problems is it's a problem of their own making, that for years it was clear that they should have been building fuel-efficient cars, that the Japanese and other countries took over our markets because they were smart enough to do that while we wanted to build SUVs and Hummers. Who's got the better of that argument?
You know, I'm going to not punt this one, but I don't know. Now, as a reporter, I was once a member of the American Newspaper Guild, the union, so I do have some sympathies there. I don't think the unions are at fault. I'm not sure you can point the finger at any one thing, but the question is raised, why can these foreign car companies build cars Americans want? Why are they so successful? Why can they build hybrids that are just flying off showroom floors, or were until recently? Again, better, smarter minds than I have looked at this question and I still can't conclude. I think, again, to point a finger at any one is unfair.
Going into this bailout package, the Republicans were arguing, the White House was arguing, that it should come out of money that was set aside for fuel efficiency. and the Democrats in Congress were arguing that it should come out of the $700 billion bailout package. What are the economic, ideological, political underpinnings of that argument?
Okay, let's start with the $25 billion they wanted to take from what's called the energy loan. Back in September, Congress passed, President Bush signed legislation that said, okay, car companies, here's $25 billion we'll lend you to make your cars more fuel efficient. Environmentalists love this. So when all this bailout talk came along, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, among others, said, no, don't touch that money. That's important. It's important to the future of the car companies. It's important to the environment. The White House said, no, take the money, redirect it. They can repay it later when they get healthy. The Speaker and others said, take the money from the $700 billion rescue plan. It's there. It's meant to help the economy. The White House said, no, wait a minute. That's not just a pot of money we can use to bail out whoever's in trouble. Nancy Pelosi gave in. She said, take the money from the loan program, but I want that money repaid. I want tight conditions on it. And that's where we stand. But with President-elect Obama coming into office, we're wondering, where is he going to be on this? Is he going to be willing to take the money from the rescue plan if there's any left? Is he going to be willing to simply offer new money to the auto companies and replenish the loan fund? There's many, many variables here. We don't quite know where it's going.
Well, we're almost out of time, but we should ask the question, where is this all going? You used to work for the Baltimore Sun, used to write for the Baltimore Sun, a Tribune company. The Tribune company today, we're talking about December 8th, 2008, announced that it was going into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. What industry is next?
I wish it was the newspaper industry, but I don't think that's going to happen. See, that's a big question in Congress, and there's tremendous difficulty getting this auto money passed. As you know, it blew up in November because people said that $700 billion rescue package, people back home are saying, show me the results. The economy's still terrible. I still can't get a loan. The credit markets are dried up. Why in the world should I go ahead and say, give another industry more? So I think whatever industry comes next is even going to have a tougher time than the auto companies.
Well, thanks to David Lightman of McClatchy for helping us understand the rescue plan for the auto industry. I'm not sure I feel better after hearing this. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Coffee House Forum.
he couldn't afford a coat again this year, wore every sweatshirt he owned. Passing windows, Alice took him from 7th. Away the yuppie faces swarming Chinatown with their looks. Winter sweet when you got some soup and no Cold Stone blues brewing in your beer, and Alice waiting in the warmth of a 13th floor. When Papo looks on her 45-degree angle eyes, the silent moon rises from her mouth into the velvet evening that engulfs him, makes him want to speak, makes him want to stand up.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. 500,000 workers in the United States were knocked off payrolls in November, so the impetus for an economic stimulus package early in the Obama administration continues to grow. There's talk this will include lots of infrastructure spending, transportation, public facilities, etc., of the sort that creates jobs quickly. But there's also the Obama promise that much of the stimulus will be quote-unquote green. Environmentalists are concerned that infrastructure investment will mean lots of new highway spending, highways that deepen America's oil addiction and the climate crisis. Ironically, with the recession, many of these highway projects are running out of money right now, like the so-called Intercounty Connector Highway right here in the Washington, D.C. region. But these projects could be saved by a stimulus approach. Stewart Schwartz, director of the Coalition for Smarter Growth, has a message for Congress and President-elect Obama. Let's hear what it is. Stewart, welcome to the Coffee House.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Before we get started on what we don't want to see or you don't want to see in a stimulus package, give us some examples of what green infrastructure would look like in America as part of this stimulus.
Well, first on the transportation side, the greenest thing we can do is to fix what we've already built, maintain and repair our existing infrastructure. It's a couple years after the Minneapolis bridge collapse. We still have bridges that need to be repaired that they say are structurally deficient. So that's something you can spend now. We haven't even been paving our roads recently because of the price of asphalt and so forth. That's something we can do. Second, invest in transit. If one thing this energy crisis showed is we did not have enough transit service in America to meet the rapid demand, and the demand has stayed because transit is less expensive to travel on for the average user. So invest in the buses and the rail cars that we need, that the transit agencies want to order. Third, it's going to be really important to fundamentally reevaluate what these project lists are that our departments of transportation have in every state, because they're a legacy of decades of special deals and so forth, and they may not be efficient and effective, and I want to go into that some more. And of course, there are other things: energy efficiency investments, tax credits for purchasing of energy efficient appliances, weatherization of homes, the jobs that go with making homes more energy efficient. And the advantages of those investments, which you talk about all the time, is you save money because of your average energy costs going down each day.
But there is concern. One of the arguments being made as part of this infrastructure investment stimulus is that quickness matters, speed matters. So this money needs to be spent quickly, needs to be invested quickly. And you know, before we get to highways, there are a lot of people who say highways can do that. But is there transit ready to go? The so-called shovel-ready projects. Can energy efficiency be done quick? Can fix it first, as you said, repair the roads? Are these things that can be done quickly to satisfy the economic side as well as the quote-unquote green side?
Absolutely. The DOTs, Departments of Transportation, know every road segment that is structurally deficient or needs maintenance and repair. They can do that right away, and they can start, hiring under very quick maintenance contracts people to maintain those roadways. On the transit side, again, there's backlogs of bus and rail orders that the transit agencies haven't been able to afford, but they need to meet the demand from the public. Those can be purchased. Those are manufacturing jobs. Certainly as we think about the car companies, let's bring them back into the bus building business and the rail car building business. What other projects are out there that I can think of? Energy efficiency, certainly you can do that.
But if these things can be done quickly and they create jobs, I know the Center for American Progress did a report in September that said with $100 billion investment in green infrastructure, you could create 2 million jobs quickly. But if that can be done, why all your recent concern and that of others that highways may get a lot of this money instead of these other infrastructures?
Yeah, well, I do want to echo one thing APTA said, the American Public Transit Association. They've showed that transit And investment in transit generates more jobs. And the other investment in transit, of course, there's a whole set of what they call New Starts projects around the country that don't have enough funding, ready-to-go transit projects. And the feds have only been paying 50% for a transit project, but 80% for a highway project. If they would just pay more for the transit project, we'd be able to get those transit projects that are backlogged ready to go.
Now, you've said that, that as you look at a lot of these big infrastructure projects that are vying for the attention of the Obama-elected administration, highways are out there in numbers that are pretty big because of what's happened in the last 8 years. What do you mean by that?
Well, the last administration was anti-transit, anti-environmental. It streamlined and pushed through a bunch of highway projects despite the environmental impact. The ICC is a perfect example of that. Those are exactly the sort of projects that are now teed up and shovel-ready, as the Departments of Transportation are saying. And in every state, the Departments of Transportation are building up wish lists, most of them cases dominated by highways, that they would build. And I want to go a little bit farther with this. One of the things that happened in this speculative bubble was we spread our development too far out, where people had very long commutes, very costly commutes with high energy prices, and that's not sustainable. Unfortunately, we subsidize that with a lot of highway construction. We don't want to restart that problem. We don't want to restart that process. Before we start reinvesting or investing in new highway projects, we need a fundamental reevaluation of not just the last 8 years of projects that have been teed up, but probably 30-year legacy projects that have been stacked up over time that don't make sense in a world of high energy prices and when we need to fight climate change.
Well, let's talk about right here in the Washington, D.C. area. The state of Maryland has been looking at what you call the ICC, the Intercounty Connector Highway, for half a century. And just this last summer, the project began construction. Now, they've just barely begun. But after 50 years of trying to get it built, land developers, et cetera, a highway that's been shown to generate new greenhouse gases and trigger more sprawl, et cetera, it started to be built, but now because of the recession, the State Highway Administration is running out of money. So the recession taketh away here, but the recession may give it back.
Well, want to tell you how damaging that highway is from a financial perspective for the state of Maryland and its needs. They are actually protecting the Intercounty Connector, which is going to cost $3.1 billion, counting all the borrowing that goes with it. At the same time, they've cut $1.1 billion out of the transportation budget already, including a lot of transit projects and MARC rail investment and local roads across the state. So everybody's giving up something to keep the ICC going.
Why is transit and fix it first and all that being cut for a highway?
I think,
and this is happening across the country.
I think there are special deals for the ICC. I've been told it's just really a small segment of the business community, very powerful segment in Montgomery County. And the thing is, it doesn't make sense, though, from a transportation perspective.
But all over the United States, these, Governor Rendell in Pennsylvania is talking about some big new highway projects. Is this just the momentum beginning with Eisenhower Ford? We just can't stop it?
Right, and we got ourselves into a real pickle this last summer with high energy prices. We were a very vulnerable nation, and I used to serve in the Navy. This is our vulnerability to oil, our consumption of oil for just moving around has made us vulnerable from a national security perspective. We have to become more energy efficient both in our buildings and our transportation. Combined, they use 80% of our energy. So more efficient places are our cities, our small towns, our places near transit, and any community that's made to be more walkable with a mix of services in that community so you do not have to drive as much. That's the vision we have for the future and that we need. It's an efficient vision of efficient communities.
So what do you say to a president like Obama who's going to have to come in? He's got all these state governors that have sort of Bush administration hangovers with the highway emphasis and all that. Here's a president who's looking at these traditional highway projects. They're glamorous, they're big. The state transportation budget's already all geared to them. How does he come in and potentially give bad political news to these governors? How does he get them excited? What would you counsel the president-elect to do first? How would you unspool a green infrastructure plan?
Do it in phases. The first phase is the fix-it-first phase. Maintain and repair your existing roads and bridges and transit systems. Buy more buses and rail cars for the transit systems that you have. Invest in transit. And tell folks that the road projects, the big costly highway projects, have to be reviewed before we decide that that's where we're going to put our money. We have to reevaluate them because of our energy vulnerability and because of the need to fight climate change. At the same time, you know, he has to know that highways, and especially outer bypasses and beltways around the country, are really inefficient. They open up new land for development while taking economic investment from older areas and older communities that already have infrastructure. Right here in the D.C. region, that's Prince George's County and the east side of the District of Columbia. Will lose if the ICC were built.
And there is the case that we've seen just in the last year that vehicle miles traveled has gone down for the first time in a long time, and transit's going through the roof. I mean, just here in the Washington, D.C. area, more and more people are using Metro. Well, what about this argument of light rail versus heavy rail? Could sort of light rail transit systems be built faster than the sort of traditional underground rail systems?
I think above ground, on the surface rail could be built faster than underground rail generally. I think you need the right transit system for the right service that you're trying to provide and for the right land use. You know, they have to work together. So no one transit system is a solution to all these different types of land uses and services that you want to provide. We've supported light rail for the Montgomery County, Prince George's County Purple Line because it makes the most sense. It provides the most value in terms of economic revitalization, particularly in the east side of the region in Prince George's County. It's going to have the highest ridership. Other corridors, particularly more suburban corridors, need enhanced bus service, and that can be provided often quickly and more cheaply. The fancier it gets, you know, the price goes up. But, you know, a lot of what we're thinking about, the best way to save the bay, to save money in your commute, to save land for green space for all of us, is to create more walkable communities. And it can be at the scale of a Twin Brook, Tyson's Corner, Rockville, or it can be at the scale of one of our historic towns.
But is it the case that oil prices are working against your agenda right now? I mean, when prices are really high, more people get out of their cars or they buy energy efficient cars. There are less people who even want to get on a highway. Now oil prices are way down again. To what degree is this consciousness of sprawl, you know, building rail, not building highways, dependent on what people are paying that particular day at the pump?
I don't know. There was enough of a scare this summer for those who had really long distance commutes and houses that were awfully expensive to heat and cool. And I think people don't want to be that vulnerable again. They might want to hedge their bets and have a less expensive commute. And they'll stick with transit in the near term and will think very carefully about where they might live to reduce their commuting costs. You know, 1.3 billion Chinese, that country is going to keep growing. 1 billion or more Indians, and they want to be middle class as well. There will be a return to high oil prices, high oil demand. We need to be ready.
Well, a big thanks to Stewart Schwartz of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. Will the upcoming stimulus package fix more than just a broken economy? Is there truly opportunity in every crisis? We'll soon find out. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
This is Glen Echo. It's wonderful. I was here 4 years ago, and it was not like it is tonight. This is the first salsa dance that I've been to. It's a huge space. There's lots of people, all in a good mood, all steaming hot, and all having a good time.
Glen Echo Park, here in Glen Echo, Maryland, was once a popular amusement park. It closed in 1968, but was reopened by the National Park Service several years later. Glen Echo's long tradition of dance began in 1899. Dances were first held in open-air pavilions, and then later in the elegant Crystal Ballroom, the site of today's Spanish Ballroom. Every weekend night and Sunday afternoons, the park's Spanish Ballroom is filled with dancers who come to kick up their heels to the sound of D.C. area's most popular dance bands. Each session begins with a dance lesson. Then the band comes on and the dancing begins.
Friday nights and Sunday nights are contra dancing. On a a style of country dancing similar to the square dance. Saturday nights are our most popular dances, and those are primarily swing. We do strive for variety, however, so we also, as you are going to see today, have salsa dancing on occasion.
It's a fabulous place. People are nice, everybody's friendly, no smoking. It's fabulous. No drinking. Have a blast, and everybody's laughing.
The ballroom has a very, very unique history. It was built in 1933 on the site of an older ballroom, and it became the big band dance hall for the Washington, D.C. area. People like Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey played here. Most of the big bands of the 30s and 40s found their way out to Glen Echo for an evening or a week. In the 1950s, a local television show was shot here, the Milt Grant Show, precursor of American Bandstand. This ballroom has a long history of being on the cutting edge of dance.
And the building has a beautiful springboard floor, which is good for the joints. I'm 61 years old, but I can dance for 4 hours non-stop.
It's a lot of fun, great music, and just the best dance floor in Washington by far. Once you've danced on it, it's hard to dance other places just because of the way the floor is made, and the size really is probably the greatest thing, is that it can hold so many dancers. Dancers of all ages and all levels can dance here and have a really good time and a really good experience, and that's just unique to Glen Echo.
For the Weekend Traveler, I'm Kathy Christensen.
Say it was, it sure looked good. But you done make me one thing that ain't just as it should be. It seems every inclination of our hearts is on evil all the time. Say it was, well it sure looked good. And that woman gave it to me, and it was sweet as it could be. It seems her determination was to impart this evil on my mind. Here I am, a little part of creation, one mother's child born free and wild in this great nation. Here's my message, here's my creed. I will be all that I can be in this place and this time. Bless you, son, and knock on wood. And may the force be with you as much as any force can be. And my newest inspiration is the world's greatest rebel against time. He was here since the dawn of creation. One mother's child, a sacrifice for our salvation. message is this creed. You can be all that you can be in this place and this time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Here it is, I know what's good. And Dad, that's just one more thing, but it's past where what I see. This means some have missed salvation, and we get stuck on the evil in our minds. Here I am, a little part of creation. One mother's child, born free and wild in this great nation. Well, here's my message, here's my creed. I will be all that I can be in this place and this time, with this love and this life.
Welcome, Leah, to the musical tradition segment of the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Now, that wasn't your typical three-chord folk song, was it?
Not exactly.
Holy moly, what was that called?
Creation.
Hey, I got your water here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Creation. Now, let's see. Why does that sound familiar to me? I know. We got to do this. Album of the same name.
That's right, my debut CD.
And that's doing real well.
I'm glad to hear
Yes,
it.
sir.
I'm glad
You
to
know
see
it.
it, right.
Now, you were nominated for a Whammy Award.
Yes, actually, before the CD came out,
Right.
for Best New Artist, and then last year for Female Vocal Folk. So
Yeah.
go up there with
Yeah.
some really cool people, so
Yeah,
it's nice.
we're talking about the Washington Area Music Association Awards.
Mhm.
That's kind of neat. How long did it take you to make Creation?
3 years.
Wow.
I started out with inadequate funds anyway. I knew
Right.
exactly what I wanted, thought I would go in and do it in a week.
Yep.
Didn't have the money, and a really incredible guy, Jeff Gruber at Blue House Studios. Got to plug Jeff.
Gotta put
He's
Jeff in
awesome.
there, yeah.
Really helped me out a lot with the CD, but it still took time and energy.
Because I remember there was about a year there where everybody's saying, when are you coming out with an album? When
Right.
are you coming out with an album?
Yep.
Yeah,
And finally I have it.
great. How about another song, but tell us about it first.
Okay, this next song is called Temporary Blue. And
Okay.
it's for my sweetheart, but it was kind of one of those times where I wasn't feeling so sweet.
Yep, that happens, but
Yeah.
you got a good song out of it.
Right, I like it.
Okay.
Great.
I'll take your water.
Thanks
Take
again.
us home. Thanks.
Kansas City or Maine, Madagascar or Spain. I'm going where blue skies prevail, or at least some blue that I can see. Madagascar blue, slowly going insane. Two parts wisdom for pain. I'm blowing this tired old place. Got a lot of love, but none to waste. Tired of being blue. tired of crying my eyes out for love. Tired of wasting time on love. Resolution to be okay. Say Happy New Year all day. Things were going so good for a while. Thought I'd trade my blues in for a smile. Call them temporary blues. Brand new vision, still no sun. Pick a purpose, everyone. I start snowing to keep back the rain. Then a tidal wave hits me again. I'm nearly always blue for you, and always partial illusion of love. Dear, I fear I'm wasting time on love. Tired of crying my eyes out for love. Tired of wasting time on love.
Welcome to the Body Politic at the Coffee House. In the 2008 session, the Maryland General Assembly created a commission on capital punishment to study the effectiveness and fairness of the death penalty in our state. After more than 6 months of meetings and hearings with more than 100 witnesses, that commission has just voted to recommend repeal of the death penalty in the Free State. The chairman of the commission is Benjamin Civiletti, the former Attorney General of the United States under President Carter, and he joins me to talk about the commission's report, which has just been completed, and the remarkable odyssey of this commission of 23 Marylanders. Welcome, Attorney General Civiletti, to the Coffee House.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You're quite an institution in Maryland, and I know you were born in New York, but you came to Maryland to Johns Hopkins, and you went to the University of Maryland Law School, and you've made your life and career here.
Yes.
And you've brought great honor to us with your service as Attorney General of the United States. But what made you come out of your very active and prosperous law practice to spend months and months in these long hearings and meetings of the Commission on Capital Punishment?
Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
And now?
Fine, it was fine. I've learned a lot.
Well, it's interesting. I saw a draft of the dissenting report, and it began by praising you for leading the commission with such fairness and scrupulous accuracy and so on. And what was your experience over the last several months going through the commission?
Well, it's a difficult and complex subject, so it was very worthwhile for me to hear from the experts as well as from the members of the public and from the diversity on the commission itself. I mean, we had 3 members of the family of victims who expressed themselves very heartfelt and articulately.
Homicide victims, families of homicide victims.
Yes, families of homicide victims, members. And we had prosecutors and we had members of the legislature. So
police officers and prosecutors. Right?
Police officers, chiefs, correctional officers.
Yeah. There's a very broad spectrum of people.
Right, and from different viewpoints.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you did was, before coming to the conclusion and recommendation to the General Assembly, you said, well, let's look at points of agreement that almost everybody in the commission can agree to, and you took specific issues. And one of the issues that we talked about was the role that race plays in the operation of the death penalty in our state. What was the conclusion there?
Well, that was the most disappointing in a way. Race plays a large role, particularly when it's considered in terms of the race of the victim, white, and the race of the alleged perpetrator being black. That combination, I think, is about 2.5 to 3 times as likely to receive a death penalty sentence from a death-eligible jury
and in
than
fact,
any other combination.
Isn't it the case that in the last 30 years the state has executed only 5 people, but all of these murderers had white victims?
We have not had in the last 30 years a circumstance of someone on death row where the victim was black.
And more than 2/3 of the victims of homicide in our state are black.
About that.
Yeah. So that's a pretty striking thing that this commission found.
Very striking,
Yeah.
and it shows a bias, I think, pretty clearly.
Yeah. What about geography? Because there were also
another bias.
Yeah, striking findings about geography.
That's even greater. If you combine the race of the victim and the race of the alleged perpetrator, along with the location of where the murder is alleged to have occurred, you find a differential as opposed to other comparisons of other counties or other mixes of about 14 to 1. That is, if someone is in Harford County or in Baltimore County, then and the accuser is accused of murdering a white person and is black, then it's 14 times more likely that that person would be found
sentenced to death,
guilty and sentenced to death than in any other jurisdiction in the state.
Right, that's quite striking. And of course, some people felt that that was okay. It's a question of home rule and local choice, but others felt as if the people who prosecute are state's attorneys, they represent the state, and we need a system that's uniform.
Of course. I mean, it's totally unfair. One of the questions the commission was supposed to answer was the system fair? Well, that's totally unfair. It's a happenstance.
It seems random.
Yeah, it's random.
What about this whole question of innocence? One of our co-commissioners was the first person in the United States who had been on death row who was exonerated because of DNA evidence, Kirk Bloodsworth. And that was something that was a constant reminder to the other commissioners about the fact that innocent people can be and have been executed in American history. What were the conclusions of the commission about this question of innocence?
I think the conclusion of the vote was very substantial, 16 to 4 or 17 to 3, that the risk of an innocent person being put to death as a result of a death penalty was a real possibility.
Yeah.
Because of the frailty of the system, because of errors in eyewitness identification, contamination of DNA evidence.
Yeah. I mean, some people think because of DNA, now we know for sure, but what we learned, of course, was that in the majority of cases, we don't have DNA evidence.
Exactly.
So we're back to eyewitness identification. And one of the striking things for me was a woman who testified about having been raped and having been sure that she could identify her assailant. And she was 100% sure, and then it turned out, because of DNA evidence, that she had picked the wrong guy, and she came to testify to us about what her feelings were.
That was very poignant testimony. And what's difficult about the death penalty issue is that it's surrounded and clouded by so many myths. And the public perception of those myths is entirely different than the truth or the real facts. Give you an example, cost. A lot of people think that it costs more to have someone in life in prison without the opportunity for parole than to be executed or to receive the death penalty. And the truth is it's 3 times as costly to have a death penalty prosecution than it is.
Because you've got to impanel the jury, and you've got to
have
two
two trials, one the guilt phase and then a sentencing phase. Both of them are very long and very tedious and require experts and almost an examination of the entire life of
And that just sets
accused.
the table for years and years of appeals.
The average length of time of the 5 people that are on death row in Maryland now is 20 years.
And that's why we saw families of victims coming in and saying, we've been sold a bill of goods. We thought the death penalty would give us a sense of justice and closure, but in fact, it's just a never-ending nightmare waiting for something to happen. And so many of them said we'd much prefer life without parole, right?
Yes, and in 30 years we've had 77 death penalty convictions. We've had 62 reversals out of those 77 where mistakes were made of one kind or another, and in none of those reversals has the death penalty been imposed the second time.
Mm-hmm. All right, so tell us about the conclusion. What is the commission telling the General Assembly and the people of our state?
They're telling them that the cost is such and the innocence risk is such and the frailty and faults of the system are such that there is no real societal benefit from the death penalty. It's unfair, it's arbitrary and capricious.
Doesn't it deter?
And we ought not to have it.
What about deterrence?
Well, the evidence was very clear that there was no persuasion, no persuasive evidence that there is any deterrence. And some people believe that there is incapacitation because you kill someone. Well, life without parole is incapacitation.
Yeah.
Some people refer to it as death by incarceration.
You were a federal prosecutor for many, many years. You were the Attorney General of the United States. Does it make you weak on crime to say that the death penalty system is no longer working?
No, I think the resources that we could save by not having the death penalty could be better used in preventing homicides, in putting people who are predators in jail for a very long time. And so the opportunity for murders of innocents would be lessened significantly.
But what do we do finally with people's desire for real vengeance and to strike back at people who do harm in really terrible ways?
It's illusory. Retribution is illusory, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. And the reason it is because in these 30 years we've had 1,311 cases of death-eligible prosecutions. Less than 0.5% have resulted in the death penalty being imposed.
It's a tiny number.
Tiny number. So there's no eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. We get the result of life imprisonment, generally speaking, and we have these very few cases of the death penalty, and they are sitting for 20 years.
Do you think,
cost?
I mean, do you think that Maryland actually can follow New Jersey and do away with the death penalty and take all of the resources we save and put it into crime prevention and assisting the families of victims and so on?
I hope so. I believe in the Maryland citizens and the public, and if they know the facts and they dispel these myths, I think they'll do the right thing.
Mr. Civiletti, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor to serve under you on this commission, and I want to thank you for joining us here. Unlike Maryland's intense and abbreviated 70-day legislative session, which often generates intense partisan debate and controversy, expert commissions like this can work in an effective and nonpartisan way to examine big public policy problems. Of course, the voluminous work product of the Commission on Capital Punishment now shifts back to the General Assembly, which will have to study your report and decide whether to follow its recommendations. In the meantime, Attorney General Civiletti, on behalf of many of my colleagues in the General Assembly and millions of Marylanders, let me thank you for this extraordinary act of public service and your ongoing contributions to the quality of justice in our state and country. I'm Senator Jamie Raskin, and this has been The Body Politic.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much.